Heyo, you're listening to Edge Coach Quip, featuring our very own Edge coaches and community, dropping knowledge nuggets to fuel your day.
Hello and welcome to Coach Quip, episode 156. I'm Coach Chris.
I'm Coach Robyn.
And a quick warning for our listeners here today, because of the title of the book that we are discussing, there will be some language that some listeners may find offensive. Or
it's in the title of the book.
It's in the title of the book. It is the title of the book, but we're going to be dropping some F-bombs, so this will be an explicit. You get your E.
I get my E. It's like my third E ever in 156 episodes.
But just as a word of warning, so if you need to listen to this later or remove people from earshot, please do so right now. All right, what are we talking about?
Today, we're talking about one of my favorite books, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck by Mark Manson. This is all about, though, the athlete lessons that are in it, because there are so many to apply, and I know as coaches we kind of, we touch on them sometimes, but I had the idea to kind of go through the book and do some direct applications with the hope that you would maybe have a few stick with you too. I don't even remember how I heard about this book, but I remember diving in and being like, whoa, I'm in. So the premise of it, though, he gets it to it pretty quickly. It's the fact that we have only so many fucks to give, right? So there are only so many things that you can care about. And it teaches you how to choose wisely and truly to yourself. It's all kind of based on the fact that, and if you know me as a coach, you know I've said this, the only thing that we're entitled to in life is suffering, which sounds so dark. Right, it does. But it truly is like the biggest part of the book is based on that. But it's what you do with the suffering and the challenges that kind of define you, and that's what counts. So the cool part is like once you embrace that, then you have power over it, because it reframes it into something that's happening to you, like, oh man, into something like, well, we already knew this was going to happen. What am I doing about it? It puts you into this almost like problem solving mode. Mm-hmm. When I read this the first time, it really honestly, it changed my life and how I thought about running a small business. I was very much in the mindset, it was probably like 2 years in, not that right now is that much easier, but 2 years in was really hard. I mean, you know, we were very much not self-sustaining. I am very used to working very hard at something and having results, you know, whether it's with sports or school or really anything. I can put my mind to something and get it done. And that wasn't necessarily happening. So, you know, it's a very different game when it's a small business. So, you know, putting this mindset of like, oh, I suffering is just hard. It's a challenge. Mm-hmm. Now what are we going to do about it? Really, I let go of the entitlement of things actually being easier, which made my life so much better. After that, it really started to influence how I coached. And again, the sound bites that I used, and really kind of that philosophy and how I spoke and worked with athletes. If you know me, you know that I'm heavy-handed. A lot of that comes from Mark Manson.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
No, it's true. And, you know, the way that you're talking about this is that it frames it from something that's happening to you to something that you have control and power over.
Yes, 100%.
Right? And I think that that's like a lot of the really good lessons in this book is taking ownership over how you are going to deal with situations. Yep. So in this episode, we're going to break down parts of this book and how it applies directly to you as an athlete. And, you know, like you said, some of it is heavy-handed. Yep. But I think that the lessons really stick out. And, like, ideally, when we're talking about the pieces that we're pulling out, it's something that you can then internalize and hopefully be able to hear that in the hardest parts of your training or in your racing when you need it the most.
That is the goal of this, right? Because I will say the things that I pepper in are the ones that come back at me the most. So we're just spreading the love.
Yeah, that's always so cool too, right? Like we love this as coaches when we say something and then 4-6 weeks later, 4 months later, we hear the athlete say it back to us, right? Like, oh, they got it.
And well, and like, it's also kind of scary. Y'all remember everything. I said that.
That too. It's a good jogging our own memories.
We're also going to mention this at the end as well, but if you've never read this book and you want a copy of it, we suggest heading to your local bookstore, specifically if you're near Chicago. Volumes Bookstore in Bucktown. I know that they recently did an Instagram post on really, truly being in a tight spot and needing business, and they would super appreciate it. I checked before we filmed. They have it. You can have it in 1 to 5 days, even delivered to you. You can order online from them. It's a really kick-ass. Might as well cuss, right?
Yeah. We're in it now.
We already got the E.
Go on.
So a really great shop that really just cares about their local community, is obviously close to Edge. So yeah, go on. Make them do a bulk order.
Yeah, exactly. And if you're interested in more about how you can support small, we did an episode about that a couple of episodes ago, so check out the Supporting Small Biz episode as well.
All right. Lessons.
Let's dive in.
Athlete lessons from The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck by Mark Manson. First up, embrace that life itself and sport itself is a form of suffering.
This is like your mantra.
This is great. And I always say, what a privilege it is as grown-ass adults to collectively, electively suffer with each other. None of us are paid to do this, right? The vast majority of our athletes paid to do this, and we electively show up to suffer together. That is a beautiful thing, that we're chasing things and vulnerable and doing things that are outside of our comfort zone. So give yourself 2 thumbs up on that one. Biologically, suffering, Mark Manson says, is useful. I love the idea of this, of how this works. Nature actually prefers suffering, right, to inspire change, because pain or discomfort leads to action, right? So go for it, right? The cool part that he also touches on too is that your brain, when we say this as coaches, it doesn't know the difference between physical and psychological pain. So if you are suffering mentally or physically, it's going to read it as the same. Either way, you have to take action.
Yeah. So put a different way, right? And we've said this in past episodes. Stress is stress is stress,
Yep.
right? So your job stress, your life stress, your training stress, your body doesn't and your brain doesn't know the difference to that. I love that. And also, biologically useful. Gosh, just think about how many people we know who are stuck in shitty jobs, but do nothing to change it.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
No
action.
Just complain about their job and they don't like it, but it's not painful enough for them or bad enough for them to actually take the initiative to make the change that would make them happier people. So that, just like thinking about that is just such a good life lesson to pull out. Like, you know, we have to experience that suffering in order to take action that will improve our lives.
Yep, you got to reach breaking point.
Yep.
All right, so page 21, I'm bringing it back. If you're following along with your live book, Mark Manson says, no matter what you do, life is comprised of failures, loss, regrets, and even death. Because once you become comfortable with all the shit that life throws at you, and it will throw a lot of it, trust me, you will become invincible in a sort of low-level spiritual way. After that, the only way to overcome pain is to first learn how to bear it. And I think athletes know this. You know, all of a sudden, it's the point where, let's say a newer marathoner, this is your first time marathon, you know, you used to get up to 10 miles and be like, whoa, 10 miles. That is a big, and it is, 10 miles is a big deal. But then all of a sudden, you're doing 10 miles on a Tuesday, or you're doing 10 miles as your last long run heading into marathon, and you have learned to suffer and dance on that line so well that it is now manageable.
Yeah, the ceiling is now the floor.
Yeah, you
That's
took
really
action.
cool.
Look what happened.
Love it. All right, the next one, and I really love this one, is that you have to choose your struggle and what to give fucks about. So it is true. You can't care about everything. And so you have to figure out what pain do you want in your life. And so is that running a marathon? Or is that biking 100K on gravel? Is it doing a triathlon or lifting heavy things, right? You have the opportunity to choose your suffering, which is cool. But in order to do this, you have to say no to things. So it's sort of like, you know, we've been having a lot of discussions in our marathon training right now about how we incorporate some of these like club runs, right?
Yeah.
There's run clubs everywhere and they have different workouts every day of the week, but you literally cannot do them all because it doesn't work towards your end goal, right? So you have to pick and choose. You can't say yes to everything. This goes for social engagements. This goes to like, you know, you probably can't go to 3 concerts and a Bears game, you know, before your long run through the course of your training cycle. You have to pick and choose what's important to you, and we always are choosing.
Yep. and you can change it too.
Yeah.
I think this is where athletes get into a little bit of trouble where, let's say they got burned out on marathons and they're thinking about trying tries and they feel almost like, well, this is how I define myself. But if it starts to feel weighty and you're not excited about it, and that's not the pain you want to choose, that's not the struggle you want to choose, then you got to pivot it to something else that seems exciting enough to you want to suffer over it.
Right. Yep. Yeah, that's a good point, because we're like talking a lot about suffering, but also there's a level of enjoyment, right?
Yes.
People, you suffer in marathon training, but also ideally you're doing it because you enjoy it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that can be difficult for us to hold both of those things at the same time, but they're both true.
That's a good nugget I didn't even see coming. All right. Number 3, you're wrong about everything. And so are we. And so are we. This is literally one of his chapter titles, which I love so much. So, be wildly open to being wrong. Like, that's like his big thing, is like, if you're just open to being like, all right, I could be wrong. I love this quote, which is, certainty is the enemy of growth. That's literally from his book. I did not come up with that. But if you think about the fact that, like, if you go into most things training-wise and racing-wise uncertain, not that you haven't planned. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying don't plan, but go in. It makes you a lot more likely to be able to adapt and change.
Yeah.
Instead of like going down this big dark hole, right? It leads us really to a place of like curiosity and not judgment, which I think as a coach as well, I have learned to do this more of like, if something's working that is antithetical to what I would typically write, instead of me just thinking, well, that is wrong, thinking, why is that working? Like, what am I not getting here? What have I not done? What can I change? And that is just, it's such a cooler way to problem solve, either as a coach or as an athlete.
And I would encourage anybody listening to this, if your coach isn't having that conversation with you, if your coach isn't interpreting whatever data you're giving them with that mindset of, like, we don't know everything, and we have to constantly be open to change.
Like,
and
no,
adapting.
we don't.
Absolutely not. Because what I write for one of my athletes that might work wonderfully doesn't apply to every single athlete. Everybody is changing, evolving, growing, and in different places. So what works for someone might not work for someone else. There's a piece about entitlement here, right? Like, you're never entitled to a good race or a good training day. You're never entitled to a perfect training block. And the more we can become open to that, right? Of being like, we have to embrace the uncertainty, the better results that we'll get. Because, I think one of the greatest things that my coach ever told me was, before a race, okay, let's see what your body can give you.
Yeah.
It wasn't like, I want you to specifically hit these paces.
Or this is what you deserve because if you put in X, Y, Z. Yeah.
Right. So there was no entitlement. It was, yes, I know I'm capable of hitting these paces, but on the day, you don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And what that did for me was open it up to, okay, I have some expectations or a range, but I was able to go faster than my range because I wasn't limited by the certainty of
the
hitting
expectation. Page 141, I love this quote that feeds right into this. He talks about being wrong about everything, and that's cool. This means giving up your sense of entitlement and your belief that you're somehow owed something by this world. It means giving up the supply of emotional highs that you've been sustaining yourself on for years. This is a big moment. Like, as a coach, it is very, very hard to coach an athlete that feels entitled to a certain type of race outcome based on their training. As soon as you let that go, you instantly become a stronger, smarter, happier, more fulfilled athlete. And to Coach Chris's point, you usually do better too.
Yeah, not that there's not some devastating moments with this, right?
Absolutely.
Like, I traveled halfway around the globe to do a race and crashed the day before the race and was not able to do the race that I had an amazing training block for, did a 2-week training camp for, had all
invested how much money in.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And time.
All of the pieces were there, and I'm not entitled to even getting to the starting line. And that, for me as a coach and as an athlete, was like a real perspective shift. And a hard truth, but I think being able to frame that back to people, like, for all my athletes, what a lesson for them and for me to say, you're not entitled to literally anything, even getting to the starting line. So what a gift it is to be able to show up and be able to race.
Because then when stuff starts going well, you're like happy.
Yeah,
It's almost like surprised by
yeah,
it, right?
Yeah.
This leads us to number 4. This is a big one. My athletes know. I've told them
I'm just
this
looking
one.
at you. You're going to say
I'm going to do this one. You are not a special flower. You are not a special flower, and you aren't entitled to anything. So it kind of those really do kind of marry each other. I think it is. He talks a lot about this, like just like accepting that most of us are average. Like, I did not win a gold medal in Paris. I don't know about you all, unless you're Haley Dans. We did not win anything gold. Even if you are exceptional at one thing, chances are you're average or below average in everything else, right? That really is just kind of how it is, right? But the cool part is that that's the nature of life. Like, if we accept that most of us are average, then we can just kind of simply be. He talks a lot about like the extremes of what we're shown, and this is so true, not surprising with social media, right? Mm-hmm. So we see like the super highs of people doing amazing things and everything being, flowery and rainbows and perfect, and then we also see maybe like their extreme lows when they're, like when you crashed out and got a concussion and had a giant black eye, but they don't understand that most of the things actually exist or in the middle, right?
Yeah, very mundane.
And that's cool. That really is kind of where we want to be. And his point is that the ordinary, the average, I'm not saying you're not trying your best in practice, I'm not saying that at all, but just embracing that being ordinary is, and giving fucks about ordinary things, you start to have a true appreciation for life experiences. I have one of my athletes, Katie Tosh, is so good at this. She recognizes that her pleasures come from the training and not the racing. And the racing is just the cherry on top, but she truly appreciates, especially going through different life phases, how much joy it brings her. And so all of a sudden, you start appreciating things like the friendships you create, your training partners, creating community, being a part of Edge for however many years, growing roots, showing up for a friend in need, whether it's athletically or not. Maybe you share a book recommendation. Maybe you buy your friend this book on Volumes bookstore.
Yep.
Laughing with your teammates. Like, I think I've laughed the hardest sometimes post practice when you're just cracking up. Those are things that maybe sound boring on the face of it, but the beauty in the ordinary and the beauty in being average and having those average moments is the thing you should be giving the most fucks about. Showing up and doing the good human things and not operating as the high or the low constantly.
Yeah, it's not just all Instagram highlights or lowlights, which often are highlights for some
themselves,
people, right? Yeah. It's so much about nailing the basics, which is how we show up every single day. And that's the unsexy part of training, right? But it comprises the bulk of our training.
Yep.
And so, the more you can lean into that and dive into the unsexy parts and do the work, right, then we get to have those highlights to share with other people. 2 episodes that I want to refer people to based on what you just said. Social recovery was a great episode. Yep. The laughing with teammates afterwards. So many benefits to that, to your training. So go back and check that one out. And gratitude journals.
Huge.
We did journaling. I can't remember if we did one on gratitude.
No, I think we did. But not gratitude journals, which we can always do that one.
Yeah, but just taking the time to appreciate the things that you're grateful for in your day, can really enhance your perspective on your training and your racing as well.
The other cool part about not being a special flower, which I'm sorry, but you're not either. Neither am I.
Yeah.
You are actually. Let's be real. But for real, it takes a lot of what I call the Strava pressure off.
Yeah.
So I have athletes that, they get very crippled by what are people going to see, especially as they're like chasing maybe a big scary goal that they've been public about. Mm-hmm. But if you start to think like, oh, I am not a special flower, all of a sudden that pressure goes away. Yeah. It's like, no, I'm average. I am average. Like that, I'm fine with that, right? But for them to start thinking that way as well, like I am going to give fucks about the ordinary things, all of a sudden that Strava pressure melts away, and we are likely in the end going to be doing even better because we don't, again, your body doesn't know the difference between mental and physical stress.
Yeah.
It's going to be able to just do more work because you have less mental stress.
Yeah, taking that pressure off is huge.
Yeah.
I also love the movie Fight Club, and there's, this is a central theme. Like, you are not a special flower is a big theme of Fight Club.
I forgot about that part in there.
Yeah, good. Number 5 is failing forward. So failure is the way forward, and we've talked about failing forward in past episodes. It's literally how we grow. We can't change and learn if we're not failing in some capacity, and when we know that, it again takes the pressure and stress off ourselves to say, like, we're afraid to post that workout because it looks like we failed in hitting our paces. If we can not give a fuck about it, we can progress faster.
Yeah, I love that. This is where we give our little stat about marathons. 1 in 7 marathons goes to plan. So many variables.
Yeah.
Weather, if you're, have a menstrual cycle, where the heck you are in that, right? How nutrition is sitting, pacing, or do you get stuck behind someone? 1 in 7. And as you go up, 50K, 50 miler, it's gonna be way worse than that, right? Yeah. So knowing that, more than likely you're gonna fail at something, with a 1 in 7 chance.
Yeah.
Going into it that way, knowing that it's going to lead to growth is huge.
And when you realize that there's literally no such thing as a perfect race, right? Something is going to go, whether it's your nutrition, how you feel, your mood, the weather, the wind, anything. When you know that it's not going to be perfect, you're not entitled to perfection, that can free us up to have a whole different experience.
Yep. When I first read this book, if you are looking at us on video, you see all of my tabs and writing because I'm a nerd. But one of the first things I wrote for this paragraph was like the why of sport, and it is all about how failure is the way forward. And it goes like this. Dabrowski, he quotes, is a psychologist, argues that fear and anxiety and sadness are not necessarily always undesirable or unhelpful states of the mind, even though we avoid them, right? Mm-hmm. Rather, they're often representative of necessary pain of psychological growth. Like, that in and of itself is wild. Like, being, in that fear and anxiety state is actually helping you grow. So then he goes on, and to deny that pain is to deny our own potential. So just as one must suffer physical pain to build stronger bone and muscle, one must also suffer emotional pain to develop stronger and greater emotional resilience, a stronger sense of self, increased compassion, and generally happier life.
Love it. I agree.
What's not to love? Go and fail.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And when you think of it in that perspective, right, it makes, like, it doesn't take away the pain of the emotional trauma or whatever it is that you're dealing with, but it does give you that perspective of, like, oh, there's a reason for this, and I'm going to be better on the other side. It's sort of like injuries. Like, if you are injured, it's like the Sha'Carri Richardson, I'm not back, I'm better, right? It's like you can build from that horrible experience and become a stronger, better, more well-rounded athlete on the other side of it. We know that regardless of if it's a mental strain that you're having, how you're thinking about your training program, all of those troubles that you have can make you better on the other side. That's great. It doesn't lessen that in that moment, but if you know that there's positive on the other side,
it gives a purpose to the pain.
Exactly.
Yep. That's another way to fail forward. All right, you get 5. That's all we got in this today. I could go on and on. There's just something so liberating about this book. And I love how it applies to athletes as well as to coaches and small business owners too. It really is cool when we feed you all some of these sound bites that we did not write. We totally stole. Thank you, Mark Manson. But I've actually seen athletes shift their mindsets, their runs. Sometimes they shift their why. And if you've read this book or you hear something that we've said and you have further thoughts or you have further examples, please DM us because I will, let's be real, eat that up. We want to hear it. And finally, just a reminder, if you want to pick up your copy at Volumes Bookstore or any other bookstore that you heart big time, have at it. All right.
And maybe get Atomic Habits by James Clear while you're there, because what would an episode about books be if we didn't
I didn't even mention it this episode.
I got you. So 2 books, required reading here.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for listening to Coach Quip. Original music performed by Mend. follow us online on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Edge Athlete Lounge. Our podcast lives in the blog section of our website. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast, and you can check out the show notes for additional ways to contact us. Ready, set, onward we go.